Okay, so now we switch back to English to introduce the opening conference speaker. On behalf of the organizing committee, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Maria Augusta Arruda, who is the head of researcher development at the University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom. Maria Augusta obtained her bachelor degree and PhD in biological sciences with a major in pharmacology from the State University of Rio de Janeiro, UERJ. At that time, she worked on apoptosis and inflammation in the immune system and made seminal contributions to this field. Maria Augusta then became a senior lecturer at UERJ and also a full researcher in public health at Fiocruz, Rio de Janeiro. I think more or less 10 years ago, she moved to the UK to work initially as a visiting research fellow at the University of Nottingham, where she is still these days. And during her first years, she got involved in the development of drug discovery initiatives between the Brazilian government and the UK government, something that she still continues to work on these days. More recently, she has changed gears a little bit and served as a manager and very recently promoted as the head of the researcher development at the University of Nottingham, where she's been leading a team of specialists who are in charge of supervising the development of the research program of PhD students, young investigators, and senior scientists at the university. Also, very importantly, Maria Augusta has been advocating for gender and ethnic equality in science, strongly supporting diversity in academia. She has also worked very hard and promoted science diplomacy and scientific connections and collaborations, something that we will talk a lot in this meeting. And I can tell you that this concept she brings with her and she masters since the early stages of her career in Brazil. She has performed a brilliant and inspiring work in these arenas, and this is what we'll hear from her this evening. Her conference is entitled "In Every Scientist, a Diplomat, Fostering the Idea of a Sustainable World." Before I hand over to Maria Augusta, I wish to inform all of you that she will be glad to address comments and questions at the end of the talk. She made exceptions for us, so thank you very much, Guta. So please post your comments on the chat box during the conference, and we'll bring the questions or comments to her at the end. So with no further ado, and again, on behalf of the organizing committee, I want to thank Maria Augusta for accepting our invitation. It is my privilege, my honor, to host you today, Guta. We are very excited to have you opening the 15th meeting of MutaGen. So thank you very much, and please take it from here.
Oh, Leo, thank you so much for the incredibly kind introduction. And it's a huge honor and pleasure being here with you today. I was thinking while, getting ready to go out to come and be here with you, that, you were concerned about the time here. It's 10 p.m. in UK, and it's definitely much better than the jet lag. But there is that feeling of excitement of doing something special and being back home. And the feeling of being back home came from the very first moment as I entered the virtual space, the virtual conference, and listening to the beautiful uh, the, the very very touching uh, testimonials and award to Juliana. It was really really inspiring, And I think that we'll come back a little bit that later. So thank you very much, Leo. Thank you
Thank
very,
you.
very much, all the organizers of the MutaGen, the president, the vice president, and the organizing committee. It is an immense honor. And I should tell everyone here, and I will start before presenting the slides, I will start with a little tale. I met Leo few moons ago. Uh, he was um, he was 10 or 12, a very early scientist, because I'm an old woman, but he's very, very young.
Oh,
During our PhD, and it was a very, very special group doing this discipline in immunology, advanced immunology, or something like that. And the links, the friendship links, they came with a huge admiration as well for the exchange of ideas, something that only science can give us. And one of them, so with the bond came the possibility of socializing a little bit. And Leo might remember that he was taking me back home,
I do.
and our in his car, and many of us of this course, it was not that late, but a bit late in the evening. The car was intercepted by a number of drug dealers with big, big machine guns. And at that moment, I realized that we needed a human connection. And as in a, I had never faced anything like that. And it was very, very close to my house. I was embarrassed. I was worried. I was concerned. I was terrified. And I looked into one of the people's eyes and said, I live around here. I'm your neighbor. I think I said something like that. And then immediately they just got out and allowed us to go ahead. And that's, I think, something that we need to, particularly the colleagues present here that are not in Brazil. Those people, goes without saying, they looked very much like me. They were men, but that looked very, very much like me. And I think that bringing back these experiences, and and the ability, and that Leo particularly, of reassuring me and embracing me, and make these things happen, and all those difficult experiences. I think that it shapes not only someone's life or social life or the friendships, but their work as well. So a lot of what we are going to discuss here tonight has a bit to do with being this person in this country called Brazil. So privileged to be able to do science, to be encouraged to do science, but that has, that could observe these inequalities around her, and moving around the world, finally here in UK. So it's about us as a community fostering the idea of a sustainable world, that is a world with more affection, more responsibility, and obviously with amazing science. I think that's we can present. And sorry for embarrassing you, Lau.
All good. I do remember the situation, but we faced as a team in
We
collaboration.
faced, exactly, we faced as a team. It was proper team science in action. So I'm
Thank
going
you for
to
being with us tonight. Thank you.
thank you. Um, so I'm just going to. Uh, so these are the complex scenarios that we face today. Violence, that I just mentioned, is one of them, but hunger, wars, the melting of the Arctic and the Antarctic continents. Uh, we are fishing. We are fishing sea creatures and putting back plastics. Um, there is still looming nuclear holocaust, droughts, floods. These are the complex scenarios that ourselves and the people we train need to create solutions for. And I think that COVID-19 really brought it to the forefront of our minds. We never experienced a disruption of that scale. That's what brought us, that's what made the conference in this format um, uh, happen this year and last year. And it didn't, for the big thinkers of science for the common good. Uh, it, it, they didn't need coronavirus to show that we need science as a global community. As it was mentioned earlier today, we've got the Sustainable Development Goals, and each one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the sub items that each one of them um, encapsulate, they all require science, high end science, to be properly addressed. This week, actually, right now, while we're here um, talking about the scientific families and connections, leaders from 200 countries are working frantically after hours to try to find a solution for the survival of the very survival of our species that is trying to hold back the global warming and keep it to 1.5 Celsius degrees. Unfortunately, despite being scientific instructed, politics, greed, conflicts are hindering this process. And it's heartbreaking to see people that traveled huge distance, members of the global civil society, walking out of this of this huge event. So showing that as scientists, we should we should not be complacent and we should always do more. So we are talking about science diplomacy and that every science is a diplomat. What does it really entails? So science diplomacy is an incredibly ancient affair. I like this image very much. So it retraces the times of the Silk Road, that big uh, that big route that connected the Far East, China, all the way to the western fringes of Europe, going through the Middle East, Africa, the Mediterranean, until, the United England, back then an island that was in the very far west. And this route was not only a route of exchange of goods, it was always a route of exchange of knowledge. Actually, the most important thing that was exchanged was the knowledge between these different nations. So for each merchant was also a science diplomat, exchanging technology, scientific advancements from different areas of the ancient world, not ancient, but of the old world. Um, I love Kepler because he was a bit of a genius, but a very very difficult genius to comply with local rules. So he and his growing family. It was a big family. He was not very wealthy, going from place to place, looking for patronage. And while he moved from country to country, he left a bit of himself, he left a bit of knowledge. And we all know that, to understand the the solar system, particularly as we know until now, that there was not huge advancement since Kepler. And there is this beautiful quote: I much prefer the sharpest criticism of a single intelligent man to the thoughtless approval of the masses. Scientists were also in their science diplomat hat on. They were also able to disclose and to make critiques and to show the inequalities around the world. So the young Charles Darwin became a fierce abolitionist after uh, coming to study, you know, uh, while traveling around South America. He landed in Brazil and he could see the how perverse was the slavery, the use of enslaved people that did the crossing um, and had their offsprings in Brazil. How and throughout the Americas, how horrible it was, and being very critical of his motherland, of England, and the role it played in making it happen. Science is without borders, and science diplomats are global diplomats. And we all are here. Um, I think that a huge part of us, up or all of us, I would dare to say, are protected from poliomyelitis thanks to two main researchers. We've got Sachs, but the ones we had in Brazil, and to be fair, in huge part of the developing world, is the vaccine that was developed for Albert Sabin. That was not the favorite back in the war of the poliomyelitis vaccine, not being granted access in US to conduct his trials. He interacted in the midst of the Cold War, in the height of the Cold War, with the Soviet Ministry of Health to develop the the miracle drops that are used throughout the world till today. And COVID-19, the vaccine effort that was um, that was brought together because of COVID-19. But even more important, the work of the World Health Organization trying to guarantee that these these vaccines that are life saving, they are distributed distributed equitably throughout the world. The modern science diplomacy has got many actors. So we've got here the Brazilian Academy of Science, the Royal Society. It's worthwhile flagging that the Royal Society has got a foreign secretary before any country had a foreign secretary. The World Academy of Science that that was born as the Third World Academy of Science, and I'm going to talk a little bit more of this. We've got the SPPC, we've got all the learning societies in Brazil, in the Latin America, and in the world. So I used to say that we've got the holy trinity of science diplomacy. That's how I was taught, and it's these are artificial definitions, but they help us to understand how science diplomacy is very much in our practice. So we've got science for diplomacy, diplomacy for science, and science in diplomacy. When you think about science for diplomacy, it would be a miscarriage of justice not talking about Professor Abdul Salam, the Nobel laureate. And I love this photo. That's when he received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1979. He went, and I get really emotional talking about that. He went um to the ceremony dressed in his traditional attire as a Pakistanis man. He was the founder of the International Center for Theoretical Physics and of TWAS. And it's interesting that it's all in this very gorgeous piece of land bathed by the Adriatic Sea. And it's not because Professor Abdul Salam thought it would be great to be able to do the experiments and then deep in the sea, which is amazing and I highly recommend, but because Trieste is very much in the frontier between what used to be the frontier between the West and the Soviet bloc. So in the olden days, so here Trieste is Italy, and just beyond, and you can see here maybe in your screens, you've got Slovenian. So you've got names that are very Slovenian names, just very, very close, bordering this strip of land. And it was one of the very few places in the world where both the Soviet and communist countries and the Western countries would allow their researchers to mingle. Abdul Salam took advantage of it, sold it as a place, like a, a, a neutral place. And that's what made so many different centers. Every red dot here are international centers for science happen. Science for diplomacy. I always cite this example because I think it's a very good one. Triple OAS got tired of the restrictions to of collaboration between American and Cuban scientists, and they organized uh, a, a summit in Havana, and it was closed. It was followed. My apologies, by a number of conversations, proper diplomatic conversations that led to the first state visit of an American president to Cuba in many, many decades, in over 50 years. Diplomacy for science is that discrete work of governmental and diplomatic officials that create frameworks for the advancement of science. So in Brazil, I think that, despite many people being very critical about that, the Science Without Borders, that was a program that sent abroad 100,000 um, students and young researchers to universities overseas, is is talked about up to this day by colleagues around the world as one of the largest enterprises in the science diplomacy space. We've got other more well established programs around the world, as it is the case of Horizon Europe and was the case of Newton Fund and the Global Challenges Research Fund. These two that allowed collaboration between the United Kingdom and the developing world. Unfortunately, we are in a phase that the world never needed so much science, and that we've got a proliferation of leaders with disregard for science. So, what we are facing in Brazil, and here goes a word of solidarity to my fellow Brazilian people. We've got happening in other places. US was in the beginning of all that, and things are starting to improve. we observed it here with the cuts to in UK, very very brutal cuts to overseas development agency research cuts that aborted a number of projects between the UK and the developing world. Science in diplomacy is what we are seeing in the COP26, what we observed with during the COVID-19 outbreak, is having policy, uh, evidence-based policy making. So science providing advice for government decisions, both at political, institutional, and economic levels. There is a number of ways that science diplomacy, capacity building, and competency development can be achieved today, and I'll be delighted to talk a little bit more and signpost to amazing practitioners in this field. I'm going to very briefly talk about where my interest for science diplomacy started, and it was when I was acting as the lead for the management of this amazing program, unfortunately short-lived, but that left many seeds that are blooming around Brazil and the world. That is the Brazil Northern Drug Discovery Partnership. Um, so I'm not going to bore you, our wonderful people, with my very rudimental um, diagram about the drug discovery process that we all know is much more complex than this. But I usually talk about it to less special and expertise audiences. And because you all know all that, there is this veil of death, this that uh, does not allow the amazing basic research to reach uh, the bedside. When we think about Brazil, we've got a very, very challenging combination. So you can see here that Brazil occupies this very, very special place, only shared with Russia, United States, and China because of its area, because of its GDP, if it's still um, if it's holding back, and its population. And if you think about the Brazilian drug discovery landscape, we've got amazing, and I'm here surrounded by all of you amazing life scientists. And during the last 30 years, we had an impressive, but even before, because it's a long-standing tradition of Brazil, particularly in the areas that support the drug discovery, such as pharmacology, biochemistry, physiology, medicinal chemistry, genetics. We've got this really, this exponential growth that led to, this very robust pipeline of young scientists in this field. But unfortunately, it does not reverted into we having a mature drug discovery orientated research here in Brazil. Here in Brazil, despite hosting most of the pharmaceutical giants and being the sixth pharmaceutical market in the world, second among the emerging economies behind only of China. So we've got a scenario that really does not encourage the discovery of new drugs in Brazil, really not allowing us to target the diseases that affect us the most, and most importantly, to make use of the amazing chemical diversity in our biodiversity. So very, very quickly, the CAPIS drug discovery program in a nutshell was it was for 4 years. It was supposed to be the first round, but the second for reasons. So it was designed 2014, began in 2015. So if you are Brazilian, you know exactly what happened during this period. So we had generous funding for research in Brazil as well as in UK. We could transfer money from Brazil to cover some of the costs in the University of Nottingham labs. We had a number of scholarships and fellowships being granted during this period. And work mission, so something that was really important to deconstruct the colonial view that, oh, people in Brazil need the UK or need Europe. The exchange of academics from to both sides was a very, very critical part of what we did. But as I mentioned, it was during what became a very turbulent moment. So the program ran from 2015 to 2019. So it was really, there were many damage limitation measures. So it was really important to understand the different stakeholders' needs and expectations. And I expanded hugely the number of friends, because all the PIs, we had 8 PIs in this program, and their teams, they became friends. And obviously the fellows that came to UK. So communication needs to be universal, clear, sharp, and engaging. I need to embed trustworthiness, and also to prospect ways of mitigating the cuts that the program received. So very much, in the science diplomacy space. So I here in a nutshell what the program was about, despite all the many issues. And I think that from all these w- cool numbers, the one that I'm mo- most proud of is that, despite, and here, sorry, it's to 2019, we trained 39 fellows, Brazilian fellows, at the University of Nottingham. And we've got 3 former fellows that are in leadership roles and growing. One of them is Dr. Daniela Trivella, that is Director of Research at Erin Bio, CNIPAM. Erin Bio is the National Laboratory of Biosciences. It didn't happen overnight. So this whole conversation is started in 2009, when I started to engage with the University of Nottingham, never thinking that I would come to UK. When I came to UK in 2011, I came to spend just few years, a year, actually, not few years, a year that became 2, that now it's um, over 10, and a number of little things that I didn't know there were science diplomacy exercises need to happen, memoranda of understanding, agreements, um, uh, exchange and of know-how and IP protection and all these different things. And in parallel, I had the privilege of, as a voluntary action, to uptake the direction of the Science Without Borders here in Nottingham as well, what was great. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later if I've got time, but it was very much pushing the 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 scientific initiation program in Brazil. But most important, as I said before, we are dealing with people, and to build. So here is here's my supervisor, Cristina Baixa Fidalgo, that I had the chance to collaborate in this project. Um, w- the Barry Callum by my side, and in the far right, Stephen Hill, that they were the leads in Nottingham of the drug discovery program, professors of pharmacology and medicinal chemistry. And here between me and Steve, Professor Jorge Guimarães, that really, in his visionary way, made it happen, understood the importance of the initiative. And now I'm going to whiz through some slides about what I think is a big risk for science, that is racism and misogyny. How does it affect science? And I remember growing up in science, because I've been in a lab since I'm 14 years old. I'm one of the offsprings of the chemistry technical high school of Rio de Janeiro. I did biotechnology there, and after that, I was a technician in a lab while doing my BSc and my PhD. And it's so important, I think, to keep an eye on it, because we need to think, how does it affect science? So there is this author, Caroline Criado Paris, that she wrote this book about the design of things in the world, and how does it fit or does not fit being a woman. And here, the deadly truth about a world built for men, for stab vests to car crashes. But I think it goes a bit beyond a man. It's a specific kind of man. It's a Caucasian, male, European, or North American man. So if you think about that, these comprise less than 10% of the world population. We've got a we've got a world that has been designed for the last 300 years by less than 10% of the world population, and it comes with a cost. So he's one of the many examples. We still struggling to find a cure for malaria that kills millions of people, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa every year, particularly children in sub-Saharan Africa every year. And we've got an amazing solution for male erectile dysfunction. We know that serendipity is a big part of the scientific endeavor, but we are talking about diseases and drug discovery here. But if we think about, going for a stroll around the world and people dying of hunger, so these things, they really need to be in our agenda. And when we think about, for example, ethnic minority, a very good friend of mine, she said, why don't we change this to global majority? How, why will not push for it? And I'm going to share something that has been occupying my mind quite a lot recently, that is the diversity paradox. Um, Ecologists, they call these big monocultures, when land, the trees and all the biodiversity is stripped, for example, to build to allow cattle to rummage, as we are seeing in Brazil. We and then someone decided to plant things there because to make it green again, and then planting only one or few species, many times not native, things like eucalyptuses because they grow very fast. The ecologists call these monocultures green deserts that have been spreading throughout Africa and South America. And it's a big problem for everything, including the provision of food in the future. And there is this very interesting PNAS paper on the diversity paradox in science. And if you, like me, loves to see data represented in different innovative ways, it's a delight. But something that is very clear is that the students from diverse backgrounds, women, people from ethnic minorities, they innovate more, but they can't secure spaces in academia despite that. Very good read, I highly recommend. And when I say that, racism and systemic racism and misogyny, all these things, they really kill. There is this paper published recently in Science that shows the ecological and evolutionary consequences of systemic racism in urban environments. So, coming back to the beginning of this talk, we can't dissociate being attacked by a number of teenagers or sometimes children with big machine guns, and the impact it's got in our environment and the impact that it's going to have in science. So it's really important, it's urgent to cultivate diversity as an ethos, to have an anti-racism approach in the scientific enterprise. So having diversity as an ethos, so that's an amazing paper. I highly recommend as well. That involves reflection, intentionality, reckoning, interrogation, and introspection. Uh, as I told you, I started inside the lab when I was 14 years old. I spent almost 31 years inside a lab, working in a lab, until I think that, I got retired and decided to manage science, to manage and to have a major impact in science. And I think that it's really important to start young, and Brazil has got a lesson for the world in this area. So, as I, something I'm involved with, and that's once again, my pet project is the Excel in Science program, that is basically a ripoff of our good old scientific initiation program, Brazilian scientific initiation program. And something that people don't talk too much is particularly in Europe, how financial support, the pragmatism of finding money to keep people inside the lab is important. And what comes when you allow people not to work in a supermarket, or in the night during in a bar to make ends meet, as we see happening all the time here in UK, how to support them to stay in the lab like apprentices almost, have a huge impact in science, developing new skills that are essential for the research activity and promoting professional socialization skills as well. Wrapping up my talk and thanking you for your patience in listening to me, fostering the idea of a sustainable world um, brings back the idea of the science of affection and affection for science, particularly facing what we are facing today in Brazil. We see the love, the commitment, the abandonment of scientists, and how having this network that expands beyond our borders keep us going. And I just want to finalize in thinking that, the science diplomacy family is a global family. And I can say that my family is is uh, is Leo, is Sylvia, is Vanessa, is Juliana, is all of you present here, is all those beautiful people in this photo from my course in science diplomacy that was in Trieste. The people I work in UK, the people I work throughout the world, in Egypt, in Zambia, in Kenya, in US, and most importantly, in my nation, that is Brazil. I am because you are. Ubuntu. Thank you so, so much.
We thank you very, very, very much, Guta. Thank you so much. Please take a very well deserved, huge round of applause from all of us. Thank you so much for such a thoughtful and inspiring talk. You have covered so many important topics in this talk, always with care and diplomacy, as you always do. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm checking again. Thank you for being open for questions and comments in an opening conference. So let me check comments and questions here on the chat box. And actually, while I'm giving the participants some time to type in, I think I'll take the benefit of sharing the section and hear your opinion. Well, the question relates to the first part of your talk. What's your opinion about the potential initiatives, especially within the Brazilian reality that you know very well? So, what are the potential initiatives to promote young scientists into the path of scientific diplomacy?
Thank you very much for the question, Leo. And I think it's critical. We come from in and there was a reason for that, but we come from a culture that you interacting too much, it would be good. It's good to go abroad and spend some time there and come back to Brazil in a rush. I think that there is a lot of misconception when it comes to interacting with foreign institutions, foreign researchers. There is a big problem with the diaspora that I think that we've got in Brazil. That the diaspora, the Brazilian diaspora, and Leo, that is a huge diaspora. There is so much shame attached to establishing yourself outside Brazil. It's something that unfortunately still persists when someone, even in the good old times that people had semi decent money to do research, and they decided to go abroad. Oh, you're running away, you're giving up. That's what we always listen to, when actually each diasporic scientist is a bridge, is a piece of Brazil in different parts of the world. So think of the new generation. First is just for them to see themselves as as global citizens for real, with global commitments, and to be able to broaden their horizons. I think that we've got this space in Brazil to do some quite revolutionary things in this space. Um, and not everything is relies on um huge funding, obviously. And I think that what we are living now, um that I do hope is something that will pass. It's going to open our eyes a bit. I think because we didn't have uh, a mature community that was well acquainted with science diplomacy, when instead of seeing the science without borders as an opportunity, despite its flaws, all I heard from colleagues in Brazil back then was, not all of them, but 90% of them, how horrible it was to take research from Brazil to train people, to give people international experience. As someone that worked very, very close and, trained personally over 30 undergrads beyond the CAPES program of postdoctoral fellows, and to see how mature these people are, their views of the world, where they came. So we I think that it is jumping in these opportunities to get ownership and help to shape them, instead of saying, oh, nobody talked to me about that, I'm going to disenfranchise myself. I think that the science diplomacy has a lot of these. We just like a diplomat that they work with what they've got, at the time they've got it. I think that science diplomacy gives this almost emotional intelligence to deal with these, with the conflicts, because we can't dissociate politics from the scientific endeavor. It's always going to be connected, and we are, and the geopolitics as well. So being well acquainted and finding your space in this world we live in, I think it be is something that I couldn't support more. And there are some initiatives starting in Brazil, but I think that we should speed it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Yeah. We need to find ways of encouraging these young people, right, to follow this path. Yeah. So, kind of a related question to the first part is still of the talk from our president, Silvia Batistuza. Uh, you already mentioned this, if you want to add something, how to promote scientific diplomacy and all the difficulties related to this with all the cuts that we are facing in Brazil for projects, fellowships, and everything.
Yes, so I think it needs to be a bit grassroots the way it is now, and influencing, people with more um with some power. I think that I try to think of the spirit in Brazil just like being one of those divers that without oxygen mask, that they need to just hold on and do what they need to do without breathing for some time, but they still there fishing or doing whatever they do. I think that's the exercise where now we don't have the precious resources to do research, the material ones, but I think that we've got a network. So you all here, you've got a network. You're organizing an international symposium in an online platform. So that's something that, you know, that we can't deny the COVID pandemic gave us, was the ability to rethink the way you interact with the world. I can share with you, I'm helping colleagues at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro to 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 in a science diplomacy course, it's almost like a collection of master classes with colleagues from Brazil, UK. So we had the president of this Harpaliera Institute talking, spent 2 hours with us talking about science diplomacy in the context of this Harpaliera Institute. um, we had scientists, policymakers, former diplomats, just sharing, you know, and how how to do. There are colleagues from Egypt and Pakistan, low resource countries, and how to be inventive and forget the limitations, the financial limitations almost, and focus on interacting with people, because it galvanizes, and from that so many collaborations come. And I'm sure, Leo, that you, Sylvia, Vivian, and colleagues here, you all know the how well regarded is Brazilian science throughout the globe. And the voice, people are listening to what is happening. They are they are aware, and they are eager to collaborate as well. So I think that we can try there is a road, but we need to make it a highway of collaboration interactions.
Sure, sure, yeah. And I think we may talk more and see what are the initiatives you're doing with people at UFRJ, as you mentioned, and probably
Yeah,
try
I'll share the
yeah,
the link with all of
great,
you.
great. Thank you, Guta. So if you're willing to address a few more comments and questions,
Yes, yes, I'm in a row
so
now. I'm so happy to be here.
good, great. So, well, this one I think again you addressed, but I'll read it and you see if there is anything you want to add more. So, we are now facing in Brazil and in many other places very difficult times. No science funding, negationists, racists. It's very discouraging. What would you say to students here in the audience? What they or all of us should do to actually change this scenario?
Resist. I think that's something that we are quite good at doing. The history of our country shows that. The history of the world shows that. And I think that every time something really transformative is about to happen, um, the 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 forces, the old forces, they try to show their dominance. So racism has always been around, misogyny has always been around. The negationists, they have always been there, but they didn't feel threatened. So I want to believe that all these emerging from the worst of our society is actually because they are feeling uncomfortable. They have seen the resistance. They are afraid. They think that they will lose. And I think that's the worst thing of all these forces is the fear to lose their privilege. So it's resisting. And in living memory, we had the dictatorship in Brazil, where things they happened very much, in very similar ways. I think that these last 3 years they've been more catastrophic. Actually, the last 5 years they've been catastrophic for research because it was like a downhill thing that started before the current administration. Um, but during the dictatorship, you- that's what we had the diaspora, people that oh, Brazil, love it or leave it. They left not because they didn't love Brazil, but because they couldn't stay in Brazil. And these very people came back to Brazil to rebuild our scientific landscape. So I think that we need, I like very much this quote from Marx: there's only one science, the science of history. So we really need to, for the young people here, we resist. You do what you can. I think that guaranteeing your each one's survival is the most important thing, because if you don't survive, we won't be able to get you down the line. But connect, finding the ways you need, but keep yourself connected to science. Persist if you can.
These are great advice and great messages. Resistance, resilience, collaboration.
Resilience.
Yes, yes. Very good, good. Well, the next question that comes here, it's amazing because the questions are being very well connected. So the question comes from Professor Cesar Grisolia, and he mentions that brains are leaving Brazil today. You just ended your speech about this. There will be a gap in the generation of scientists to continue science in Brazil. He asks, "Do you have any comments?" I will change and say, "Do you have any further comments?" As you already mentioned a little bit about it.
Yeah, no, that's a great questions, as all of them. Um, I think that the the next administration that will, I'm sure, have a will realize the need, because supporting science is not because it's the enlightened thing to do. It's our survival. In the end of the day, we need to survive the what the Anthropocene is going to throw at us. We've got no idea what is around the corner. So science, we need science, and they will realize this need as a sovereignty project. And I want to believe that we all, as scientists, as Brazilian scientists and our allied scientists throughout the world, will be able to support the having programs to bring Brazilian people back. But what is really, really scary are the ones that are just not going to happen, because there'll be no ways of fostering it. So we will need to have a very, very advanced program, really. be- It's almost like a retraining program. We need to find mechanisms to bring people back to science. And that's something that here in UK happens quite a lot in a more sophisticated way, because it didn't go through the same. But there are programs. One of them is the Janet Thornton Fellowship for women that leave science because of it, or people that leave science because of family commitments and things like that, or any other um, reason now. And one of our friends, Leo, Carla Jones, she's one of the awardees of this
Hmm.
UK fellowship that that allow people to return to science. I think the same thing we'll need to do in Brazil, because we are going to have people work in different sectors, but with the formal training and the willingness to of a career in science. So we'll need to I think that we'll need to deconstruct what a scientific career looks like. And I want to believe as well that these people, they will bring their unique experiences. We see people that are cooking takeaways. They are doing takeaways for delivery, that are cleaning, that are starching shirts and ironing and all these things that they were not. There's nothing wrong about any of these activities, but they
Sure,
were not trained for these activities.
sure enough.
And these people, we will need to rethink, otherwise we will perpetuate the privileges and inequalities that brought us to this situation. So that's what I hope. I hope that we've got a way of bringing back the ones that went abroad to continue to do science. And that's the very, very few, the very privileged ones. But most importantly, this mass of people that are now displaced. They are displaced populations in activities that was not what they trained for, and that are thirsty for science and to bring back them to academia.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to bring them back. We have to be creative and supportive and find ways of challenging times, right? Very challenging times.
Very
But
challenging time. But we will learn, I hope, as a community, because I think that the scientific community, not only in Brazil, but everywhere we are, it's a quite bourgeois um, community. And we are seeing now what disengaging, detaching ourselves from the wider struggle causes. So I think that we need to rethink the way we live. We I think that we are about to see a generation of scientists that is much more politically engaged. Science, they are science that are more diplomatic engaged as well. Um, but we carry on. We are good at it. We are good at carry on.
that's true. That's a great message to wrap up, right? To be optimistic for the future and for its to come, right?
Right.
So yeah, I see. Well, I hope I haven't missed comments, and if I did, I apologize to people who made the comments. It's now very late in the UK. We don't want to take much of Maria Augusta's time. I just cannot forget to mention, and I will do this in Portuguese because there's a lot of people here congratulating you for the brilliant talk, awesome presentation, great talk. But there are some of them that are close to you. So, Professor Israel Felsen Swab,
Foi meu
he,
professor. He was my lecturer. Thank you so much.
I know, he says in Portuguese, so I don't miss the feeling. Maria Augusta, orgulho enorme de te ouvir. Beijo.
Emocionada. Grande beijo. Grande beijo.
And then awesome presentations, great talk, and also a friend, Carlos Fernando Araújo Lima, says, Guta, você é a melhor. Um abraço daqui da UERJ, uma
Oh.
inspiração para todos nós.
Ai, que emoção. Muito obrigada. Muito obrigada.